sent a questionnaire to the advisory board. We asked county staff. We sat down with both FBO operators. Yes, ma'am.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
the annual operations for Inverness, you said about 60,000
Is what's projected.
projected, and then what about for Crystal River? I didn't hear you say.
It's in the 30, 40 range, so the number that you're currently at is what the projection said.
So 40,000?
Yeah, and they look out to 2050. I'd have to pull that number up. I might have it in my report. But
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
And you said 100,000 operations for Inverness? 60, okay. That sounds more reasonable. Carry on.
So we sent questionnaires out to the various user groups, management groups, and collectively took their feedback to identify things you can control internally, both strengths and weaknesses, and things that are somewhat outside of your control, albeit you can respond to or you can plan for as far as to be competitive. But the opportunities and threats are a little bit harder to contend with. And so looking at the collective feedback, we, in the corner there, we got 6 responses for Inverness out of them. We were provided a list to send them to, and typical questionnaires really don't get great feedback, but I think the feedback we did get is representative of the issues, good and bad, that are present at both airports.
May I?
Commissioner Finnegan.
Under, on Inverness, you had under the weaknesses, it said instrument control, I think, and then it said night. Is it something with instruments, or does that mean we just have poor lighting? Is that what they're actually saying?
No, so typically it's related to obstructions. If there's something that cannot be mitigated or removed, it presents an obstacle. So at night, it's less easy to see. So the approach is not, you're not eligible to shoot the approach. We had that question come up for Crystal River a few months ago, and it's due to trees and the approach to, I think, runway 9.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we looked at the strengths, and the biggest thing for Inverness is you have a lot of land. Even with the build out of the industrial park, you still have more land running south to north. You have some land on the west side of the airport. Considering adding additional land, you have the support. I think that was the biggest thing, the support from the county. Being advocates, vocal advocates for the airport is acknowledged. You have support from the county, and there was a change of leadership and management throughout this process, but throughout it, it's been a consistent advocacy for both of the airports. Some of the weaknesses: access road. I know that's programmed into a future project to improve that road. Additional hangars. The waiting list at both airports. There are no vacancies, and you've got 20 T hangars at both, 20 box hangars. So you have a considerable wait list. Consistency in governance. One of the things that we received was somewhat inevitable, is the changing ideology as you go through election cycles of board members, of county staff, having a consistency in management, long-term plan for investment to make sure that, 10 years from now or 5 years from now, something doesn't change in an ideology that may change why I made the investment. A restaurant, Inverness was built out as a restaurant. There's been different talks about zoning and the allowance for a restaurant, but it's just a matter of building it out. And I know there's discussions of where a future restaurant could go, future FBO could go. And then multimodal access, that's a big thing. If you have an industrial park, it'd be great to have rail access, direct interstate access, but there was a comment about direct access to I-75. You're not too far away from it. So if you're talking logistics and cargo, every mile counts. And so that was seen as, if you could pair those two together, rail, airports, if you could ports and the sea, that's ideal. But so some of the opportunities that are out there outside the bounds of the airport and the county, location, again, we talked about that. Flight training, the demand for that across the state is high. And so if you could attract it here, it's going to be a win. Law enforcement, many municipalities will have mosquito control, services like sheriff, medevac, those things located on an airport. Not really a revenue producing opportunity, but it's good to have those in proximity when you need it. And then FBO, and looking at comparative airports, the relationship that we were told from the FBO operator Inverness is positive and encouraging and welcoming. And then industrial zoning, that again goes back into the business park comparative to parcels at other airports and the availability of land to be attractive. A threat is the workforce. The CFIs, it's hard to come by. If they do come, they may stay till they get their required number of hours and then leave. So being able to forecast, long-term business strategy, you have to be able to attract the CFIs and the mechanics. Alternatives to 100 low lead, that's a topic in the industry right now. Sustainable aviation fuels, or SAF. And then adjacent land uses as a threat. You're neighbored by a park, community, neighborhoods. And so encroachment of those with proper zoning may not be an issue. You may have compatible land use with it. We do know there's a tree obstruction issue at Inverness, that trees in people's yards, so it causes an issue to your approaches and could be a threat. And then community opposition, I think overall that was low on the response. Doesn't seem to be much pushback on the direction of the airport, more so just curious and knowledgeable citizens wanting to know what's happening and what's developing around them, not so much pushback as opposition. Lack of industrial properties, that's currently, you have vacant fields, you have places to develop, but you don't have currently that industrial site to be able to market. And then cost of flying overall is going up. Cost of fuel, cost of maintenance, cost of pilot training. All right, let me go back to, so Crystal River. So we did get a little bit better response for Crystal River. Some of the strengths, again, FBO services seems to be consistent from previous operator to Mr. Chen, and positive things were said. Other aeronautical services from flight training, sightseeing, charter, there doesn't seem to be a gap in services that are needed as being provided currently. You have 2 runways, so you have an alternative. One of them is a grass runway, whereas the other one is asphalt. Ramp parking, for the size airport, there's a considerable amount of space. And the only issue is that it abuts the grass runway. So it is limited in development and usage. And then airfield elevation, what I saw watching the news, Hurricane Idalia, it was downtown was flooded. But I think that was Idalia, it might have been Ian. But one of those, it's flooded, but the airport, I'd called Todd, I said, you have any damage, you have any water? Nope, pine dry. So the field elevation in terms of emergency response, getting resources into the county, not just for aviation, but staging for fuel, generator supplies, it's definitely a positive. Some of the weaknesses, no self-service fuel, although there's a project coming up to replace the fuel tanks and add a self-serve device. Additional T-hangers. Currently you have 2 banks of T-hangers. It's in the county's plan to build a 3rd. Runway 9 and night IFR restrictions, similar situation as in Inverness. Again, the trees. Want a longer runway. You're in the process of undertaking that currently. Ground transportation, that's rental cars and having designated places. And there's been conversations about, improving the terminal. not necessarily changing it, but adding those type of services. If you go into and general aviation terminals of that size airport, you may have a desk for enterprise or, you know, some of the other operators, or have the ability to ferry those people to an off-site location. So that was wanting to have that in-house. Compatible land use, I think at Crystal River, that's a big one. You've got the park, Bicentennial Park, you have wetlands, you have the armory, you have the highway, you've got a golf course, so you're landlocked. And you have to be a little bit more strategic in your planning and how you lease out and develop that land. Aging terminal was a big one. However, we also heard that the nostalgic of it, it's, you know, representative of the community, and it's been that for a long time. So acknowledging that, improving it or updating it, keeping the charm of the town, why people visit Crystal River, it somewhat lends itself to it. So opportunities, Gulf Coast with, you know, Nature Coast and travel, access, easy access off of Highway 19. And then another one, opportunity runway extension. The longer runway you have, the more, you know, larger aircraft you could bring in, more fuel flowage, more people. So that's an opportunity compared to others around us.
Just because we're on public record, I don't want everyone to think that we're bringing in larger aircraft. This is just to give better operations to the current aircraft that are coming in, because they have to take off with less than full fuel and go spend their dollars elsewhere. So,
again, you have adequate flight and flight training is currently provided. I don't think there's a gap in what the market demands other than CFIs, right? Being able to provide, to service that demand. And then again, community support for the airport. Some of the threats, says landside elevation, what that means is outside of the airport. So access that, yeah, great, the airport's open, but I can't get to it. General economy, I think the consensus there is everything's so expensive. And the cost of flying, to be the weekend flyer, to go fly up and get a hamburger, that's getting harder and harder. And then public perception, you hit the nail on the head. Being clear of what your plan is, what the runway extension will do, what your overall plans are, and just making sure that's consistent from the BOCC to all the other, to the AAB. And let's see. Okay, it's kind of hard to see up here, but these are graphics that are supplied by FDOT and the CFAS, which is Continuing Florida's system of airport planning, and there's another P in there. But anyways, they do research on each of the airports, each of the markets. They break it into districts, and so when we did a comparison of data, looking at Brooksville to Williston to Marion County, and all the way up to Perry Foley, and that's kind of your area that CFAS groups. So every quarter, the CFAS meets, and the airport managers and directors get together with consultants and talk about industry issues. And so it's a good benchmark in lieu of going further south and looking at the Tampa market, St. Pete, Sarasota. It's different in market comparison. And so fuel availability, you know, airport access, flight instruction, it's there. I will preface too that this is the most updated one that they currently have, and it's aging. What you'll see in a lot of the documents that are put out, COVID really caused an issue, but in Florida it was like the opposite, right? Because everybody else was closed, Florida was open, so it's trying to project, you know, what your demand and forecasting what the next 10, 20 years is going to look like. It's a little difficult. All right, let me see. And this is just a graphic to show you similarly what other airports look like. The one in the right-hand corner, you know, showing regional population, distance between each of the airports, and the overall top 5 industries. But as you can see, this data is getting a little aged. So they update it. They do what's called a FASP, or Florida Airport System Plan. They're currently updating this one. The last one was done, probably 5 years ago, 7 years ago. And it's, I think the current one is FASP 2035. All right, comparable airports. These are the ones that we tried to hone in on to see what your neighbors are doing. From Brooksville and Ocala, I think those are two of the larger ones, but different type of operations. One is more centered on traffic and hangars and based aircraft, whereas Brooksville, a lot of their revenue comes from outside the airport leases, non-aeronautical leases. Leesburg, inherently busy, a lot of based aircraft, a lot of traffic. And then Marion County X-35, we'll get into that. It's a county-run airport, but let's see. Yeah, that's right. Okay. All right, so we looked at some of the data in comparable airports from travel distance, number of runways, to find similarities and, common denominators of how are we like the other airports, or some things that they may have that we're missing. For context, and appraisal also looks at the same things relative to, what your fair market value should be for your land. So on the next slide, a big one is in the middle section for fuel prices. If you'll see at the far right, in comparison to the others, you're on the higher end at Inverness. X-35 at $4.11 for Jet A. Our guess is, and looking at the data, is that it's being somewhat propped up. That they may be selling it at cost. There's no profit to it. It's county-run FBO, so whatever the overhead cost, it may be this is what we bought it for, this is what we'll sell it for. And it could be even undercut pricing if they're balancing those expenses to some other cost center. So that's the $7.49 in comparison to X-35, which is about 18 miles away, straight line. And when you look at it, $3.30 per gallon, that's a big difference.
Commissioner Schleybaugh?
X-35 is Dunellen.
It's Marion County, right? Yep.
So why, I'm curious, and you might not know this answer, how much fuel is Dunellen selling compared to Crystal River and Inverness? Because I would be more tempted to go to Dunellen. Do you know?
It's quite a bit. It's quite a bit more than, I don't know precisely the number, but it's, in comparison to, oh man, it was, I think we get to it later on, but as far
Okay.
as the actual number, and it's in our report of, but yeah, people are flying in to get the gas and leaving. So when you look at the base aircraft count, it doesn't pair up with the type of aircraft that are there and the amount of fuel that's being flowed.
And what I'm thinking, and it might not be relevant, but we're courting companies to come to the new industrial business park there in Inverness. Top priority for me, and that would make a difference, I would think, in businesses if there was, a $2 difference, more than $2 difference in fuel. We have to think about that too, because it might be counterproductive to be courting businesses and saying we have an airfield, but they can look at this and say, well, why don't we just set up in Dunellen?
Yeah, likely if it's, all the factors considering access, cost of, square foot for development, those things aside, if it's strictly fuel and that's the only thing that's keeping you, likely you'll get a request for them to build their own fuel facility. My personal opinion on that is you're taking business away from the FBO or whoever's providing the fuel service. And so you want to be somewhat controlled in allowance of having everybody have their own fuel farm because a big revenue stream for airports is the fuel, at least for general aviation. And so if you take that revenue source away from the FBO and give it individually to each hangar operator, It's not as enticing.
And I don't want to take anything from our FBOs in that sense, but I want the FBOs to be cognizant of that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, it's definitely an outlier when you look at that number. And, you know, it could be a fuel supplier, just that's the cost that he's getting it at. There's many factors I think that go into why that price is an outlier compared to others. But that's a big one. And then another one, T-hangers, and looking at your base rates of what the county is charging for your T-hangers comparative to other airports. It's actually on the higher end. So if you look at the airports in here, at 420, 425, and you look across the board, yes, there are some at $546, but those are larger. So your average size, about 1,100 square feet. So that's a good number. It shows that you, at least for the county-run buildings, you're in good shape revenue-wise. As far as, you know, subleases, that's different.
Of course.
Sir, I noticed that Ocala, Leesburg, Brooksville attached a fee to their hangars. What's your thoughts on that? Is that something that we should look at?
Yes, we've talked at length with staff and the AAB about what the process should look like for being on the wait list. From an application to, you know, a background check. That came up recently, so I shouldn't have said that second. But, you know, but also it's showing that if your demand is this high, and I'm just going to throw my name on the list, a story that we hear is, you know, they'll come in for a season and they want to park the aircraft here for 4 months. They used to come in at a certain date and say, I'll start calling, I'll start putting in my application, you know, and now it's they're wanting year-long agreements, and I'm only gonna be there 3 or 4 months. I don't care because the demand's so high and the supply is so low that having that as a requirement to say, and it's not a lot, whether it's, you know, they could be anywhere from $50 to $250 is when my name gets, you know, I'm next on the list, I'm serious about it. And some other things that airports do it differently is whether you currently have an aircraft or you have a certain amount of time after notification to get the aircraft and put it in the building. So rewriting, that's one of our recommendations, is to rewrite the policy for your waiting list. And so there's no conflict, animosity. It's, well, I emailed this date, and, well, this was a handshake deal. You know, as the demand goes up, I'm sure those stories are going to become more prevalent. Let's see. All right. So that information, somewhat of a recap of the market forces at the airports. So what we recognized early on was you have a lot of activity. Not so much in operations. I think it's a consistent number for your size airport in town. But it's the amount of projects, the success that you have with outside funding, outside of FAA and FDOT. And that takes man-hours to manage. If you don't manage it internally, you manage it through consultants, or, you know, everybody kind of wears a lot of different hats. And so coming on board, recognizing that Todd was somewhat new in his position of, you know, starting this process about 6 months, I think, in the job. But the way the airport is set up under the county, it's not an enterprise fund, it's not a separate, you know, division. It fell under Public Works and Technical Services, and then it went to Economic Development, and then it came back, which is, hey, fine and right. You know what? They're both great places to be. One is looking out down the road, the other one's looking at the road, you know, and getting the stuff done from day to day. And so both are tremendously needed. But what we did see is a void in having enough hours in the day and enough people to do it, to be able to handle, really it's the administrative part of it, is taking away most of the time. So if you're processing grants, all the paperwork that goes along with it, it's hard to get up from the Lecanto Government Building and go to the airports. And when you're there, it may take all day. You may go for a ceiling tile, but then you're talking to people, hey, now that you're here, let's look at this. And so splitting that time, last time I was here in November, we talked about that and what would be a good, resolution to having someone based at the airport. And so you only have one. You do have support staff from the county. And now that Carl and Marcelo are working with Todd, things are moving more consistently and having somebody to ask questions to and get direction. And that was our recommendation when it came to staffing. You could hire more people, or instead of creating a silo in of itself where you replicate accounting and operations and public works, you use the resources that you have. Some of those resources I understand, like county maintenance and trying to get those positions filled, it's tough. As a public body, you can only pay so much comparative to a private industry. It might be more attractive. So finding those qualified people to work here is tough. So you got to use what you have, and you do have qualified staff that do work here. And so bringing all that together and coordinating and sharing responsibility was our recommendation. But long term, from where the arrangement that the county had, when you look at the leases of both FBOs, bulk of the responsibility from day-to-day management is delegated to the FBOs. Whereas the guidance we received and direction was the county wants to assume responsibility. And we talked a lot to the AAB about risk. At the end of the day, if something were to happen, still your airport, still your buildings, you could lease it out, but that responsibility ultimately will fall back on the county. And so making sure that your interests are protected and having dedicated people to facilitate that, whether it's an operations specialist that's there at the airport, because without county, being forward-facing, everybody thinks that the FBOs run the airports, all of it, the inspections, the NOTAMs, because they do. And so that responsibility needs to be pulled back to ensure that the risk is mitigated. Because at the end of the day, I think the county does have the resources to appropriately assist that, but having someone there full-time at both airports is needed. And what that would allow, Todd to do is to focus on the longer-term items, planning, master planning, grants, and when we get into the recommended actions, that language changed a little bit, and understandably, you got both ends of the spectrum, the people that need to be there day to day, but also somebody's needed to look further down the road and make sure that legislative funding is still going to be supported. The collaboration with the FAA is upheld, not just at the local ADO program manager level, but up to, and all the way up to DC. So whether it's integration and working side by side with the federal lobbyists to ensure that the county is on the list. So from an airport director down to an operations specialist, the direction that the perceive that the county wants to go in growth would require that. Because if not, you're just going to be pushing more to the FBOs. And
So
and
for
there's-
an airports department, then how many, including Todd, how many employees are you totally seeing in the airports department, and where would they be located? Because I assume the head needs to be in LGB, Lecanto Government Building.
Yes, our initial recommendation was short-term within 1 to 5 years. And so that was to hire an operations specialist. Todd would serve as the airport manager. And that's the title some airports use, airport executive director, if there's a lot of non-aeronautical revenue, more industrial type. And then you've got the airport manager that will handle the FAA grants and day-to-day airport things. But our recommendation was get the operations specialists on board. They're fairly lower salaries for an FTE. You may be in the 40 to 50,000 range, whereas a director, 3 to 4 times that much.
So what's the total head count?
So in the first 1 to 5 years, we were recommending 2. But
Total.
So the total staff would have been 3. Right now, let's see, director, I think our recommendation will change based on the guidance. it'd be the airport director, it'd be Todd, and then whether Todd could facilitate the operations specialist role, or at least part of it, a dual role, but the financial administrative assistant to handle some of the day-to-day reporting, grant applications, the clerical type of work.
So that's 4. Did you
So the
say
director,
2?
I'm sorry, the director, Todd, and then a financial assistant. Financial administrative assistant would be 3.
Okay.
If you had it in your, if you were put it in your budget, 4 would be great, but I think right now, today, you don't need 4.
And where are those people located?
It's a good question, because you have 2 airports, so you can't be in both places at the same time. I think the administrative assistant would be, and financial person would be in the government building. The director would be in the government building, but should also be forward-facing and meeting with his tenant basing. And then the operations manager, airport manager,
Would split time between the 2 airports?
I think so. But also spend time at the government building, and, because if he's there on the ground every day, he understands the pulse of what the users want and need, and to be responsive.
Kind of goes to the space needs thing, because they would have to make room for an office at the FBOs. Commissioner Schleba?
I agree. Last summer, Todd wasn't in here, but I said I felt Todd needed to be at the airports and have specific office hours. On Tuesday, Thursday, I'm in Crystal River. On Monday and Wednesday, I'm in Inverness. I still believe that. I don't know if that's part of our space needs study, but I don't even know if Todd likes that idea of not, but I think he should be at the airports. I think you should be the face of the county so that there's a positive thing. We can't count on Andy or James to be selling our county. We need our employee to be selling our county. Because I have no control over what Andy says about the county or what Mr. Chin says about the county. So I need you to be, especially in Inverness. This is so important to get the economic development going. So, Mr. Howard, I said it last summer, and I'm going to say it again. I think Todd needs to be at the airports.
Okay.
And I know I'm just one commissioner, so, that's my opinion.
So we'll put him in a plane. It could be like a plane. That could be an office.
Well,
Sure.
I would say that Todd is Mr. Howard's employee. And while we can make our desires known, I think that's Mr. Howard's call, and I would trust he and Todd to get that worked out.
All right, you two. Am I going to have, well, I was going to say, do I have to separate you? But you're already. They're just having fun. Okay?
And understandably, coming from the public sector side, bringing on FTEs can be a difficult task. You want to make sure that there's a use, and as projected, both airports, there is a need for additional staff. Todd he's been busting it since he got here, and he's very enthusiastic, and he's learning every day, but there's only so many hours in the day. And he's able to accomplish a lot. What you don't want to see is diminished quality by being able to get so many things out the door. But he does have a tremendous support system. I commend Mr. Howard and his staff for that. So,
We got an A-team going on now. It's really nice.
So as you look forward, as the business park comes online, as you have tremendous interest in land leases, hangar developments, those things will require more management oversight. And so what we looked at was within 5 years, get the master plan done. What we recommend is some of the policy and guiding documents, the foundational items that all airports really have. Make sure those are in place. They're relative to what you plan to do and your overall strategy and goals. And then bring on that director, but taking a step back a bit. If you're going to implement all those things and create them, wouldn't you want the person that's the director to be sitting in the seat to say, I could advocate for this because I helped write it, and be able to bring in those best practices, what they've garnered from other airports. So I could see it both ways. And with the support from the county, you know, the FAA may say, well, we don't expect the growth to be that steep, but you do, and you're going to go out and do the things that it need to support it. And so that decision, we could support that, to bring on an executive director, work hand in hand, you know, with Todd, and manage the overall long-term outlook of both airports. And one of the recommendations is an enterprise fund, not so much a separate entity that would be governed by a commission or an authority separate from the VOCC. But if you were to go that route, operations and maintenance, and again, you would create a silo of all things that would be required. You could either hire them in-house or contract those services out. All right. Let's see. Nope. All right, here we go. So we're moving to the financial analysis part, where we looked at operating revenue and expenses from the FBOs, the T-hangars, county-owned buildings and operated, fuel flowage, and others. And then your expenses, which are labor, the costs that were available to us, and then capital recovery and your capital cost. In this process, we developed a list of documents that we needed, supporting information, and the county does not currently operate as a cost center for airports. All revenues go into the general fund, all expenses come out of the general fund. And so it's hard to track. And so from an attorney, hour here, hour there, to somebody overseeing public works that may spend a couple hours a week, and how do you designate that time to each cost center? So that currently does not happen. You can make it an assumption of what those costs would be. We know Todd's cost, you know, from buying a stamp to buying paper, to, you know, your typical overhead cost. I guess stamps aren't that important anymore. But all the things that it takes to run the airport, those are your costs that are baked in. So expenses-wise, it would be good to have better information there. And that's one of our recommendations, is to set that cost center up so you know precisely how much money you're making. And the important thing is one of those grant assurances that are required by the FAA is that you do not divert revenue away from the airports. And so something we'll get to in a minute, is at the business park, you have the potential to make almost $13 million a year. And where does that money go? If it goes back into the general fund, all $13 million need to go back to the airports. They can be swapped. That money can be spent on Crystal River and likewise. But they have to stay at the airports. The opposite is true too, that if you're not making enough money and you're having to, you know, push money in, other than like an ad valorem or property tax, it gets a little gray. And so getting those finances under control in a cost center is required. And so looking at the revenues, you have a current operator lease with Wright Rudder. It was initiated in 2018. It had a 5-year extension recently, back in September. And it also includes an additional 2 5-year options before the expiration. And they are options you could exercise at your desire. It's not a requirement. There's some leases that require a base term, like a hangar lease. It may be 20-year base term lease with extension options, but the FBO is every 5 years for Inverness. They currently lease the terminal hangar building off Airport Road. It's 15,000 square feet. They also lease the aprons, the fuel farm, aircraft hangars, and they provide similar services to Crystal River. So fueling, flight school, aircraft maintenance. And there is we have it in our report, the Exhibit A of what the property they lease covers it. So it's not every building. The T-hangars and are operated by the county. There's some other, the sheriff's department, but a bulk of the hangars that are at Inverness are subleased by the FBO to different tenants. And let's see. Okay, so your operating revenues, your initial lease base was $5,450 per month, or $65,400 per year initial term. There's been CPI increases each year. Last couple of years, it's been upwards of 20%. Yep. And so at the end of the day, you are making $78,884 is projected. But the implied lease value of what the box hangars, the T hangars, dome hangars, and those things should go for based on comparison to other airports or the data that we know that we've been provided, your implied lease value is $164,750, which is a difference of about, I think it's 52.5% is what you're giving away. So 47%.
So, Madam Chair,
Commissioner Bays?
on the fuel farm on Inverness, you have NA, so there's no calculation for fuel in there.
Well, no, we don't know the total number of gallons being pumped. We, at Inverness, we are reported the gallons that are sold publicly. So in the lease with the county and the FBO, it allows the FBO operator to use that fuel farm for his internal operations and not charge a fuel flowage fee. Right now, it's 5 cents per every gallon. Some airports charge 10, some airports charge nothing. They may charge a management fee or a user fee for the FBO to be able to use that, just as you would, you're gonna pay us a monthly rent for a hangar building. You get to use this facility, pay us a fee for it. Our recommendation is to take that fuel flowage fee out. And there's different levels of take back, and I'll preface it, and I want to be clear that you currently have a lease that you signed in September. It has a 5-year term through 2028, barring any unforeseen things. All the recommendations as related to the FBO would be at the expiration of that term or as desired by the commission. And so if you want to exercise the next term for another 5 years, you can do that. So any changes in lease terms, the amount that the FBO operator would be paying per month, those things, recommend that those stay in place. There are a couple provisions that need to change based on FAA grant assurances of non-competition and exclusive rights, but yes, ma'am.
So, when you say on page, whatever that is, on the financial piece, it was NA, but then when you get to the next page past that, you have the 5 cents gallon per transaction, but you also have the 125,694 gallons. And then the fee for 23 was $62.85. So that's what the county received?
Yes, ma'am.
So.
Yes, so the implied lease value is, Dave, you want to answer that question? I take it to mean that that's your projected, what you could make.
Well, I mean, I just took that 125,694 gallons and I multiplied that by $7.50, which would be just shy of $943,000. So if you're pumping that much gallons at that fee of what we talked about being higher than the average, that's how much, and then we're only getting $62.85 of almost $943,000 in gas.
Right.
And if you
So.
buying in bulk, if you were paying somewhere between $2.50 and $3 a gallon, and you took that off, I mean, you're probably somewhere $550,000 in profit, roughly, not to be exact.
Correct. So, morning, everyone. Dave Byers with Quadrix Aviation. So the assumption here was that we don't know what that value would be for the FBO to have the opportunity to use the fuel farm for his operation. The fuel flowage fee, the way to look at that may be more as a concession fee for the privilege of selling fuel to the public, because obviously the fuel that he pumps into his own aircraft are not accounted for. We have some recommendations on how to fix that, so that the costs that you incur for operating or just owning the fuel tanks They obviously are going to have to be replaced at some point. There's some heavy maintenance that might occur. You have all the permitting, insurance, everything else that goes into it. Should be recovered as a fee for using the fuel farm. So right now, the lease is silent on that number. What that implied value would be, I didn't think would be appropriate to show it here, but as a recommendation for the future in terms of the revenue side of what adjustments that you do make would be based on some compensatory rate to account for at least your costs. And there's opportunities to do that. One of the things we're recommending is taking the fuel foliage fee out of the lease as well. There's a couple reasons for doing that. One is that because it's embedded in the lease, it's hard to adjust it unless you want to reopen the lease, and that opens up, that whole negotiation or renegotiation. One of the more common ways of recovering that is essentially you figure out what it's costing you, but you're also entitled to a profit margin on top of that. So in one scheme would be you act as the master FBO. You buy the fuel and you sell it to everybody else on the field. And you cover your costs for the fuel, your operating costs, your capital recovery, and you might charge a small profit margin on top of that. The FBO takes that, what his rate would be, and then he adds his profit margin to it and sells it to the general public. The question came up earlier, why does, what's the airport? X-35. Denali. Why are their rates so low? The county operates the FBO. They're actually the ones that sell the fuel. So, and the danger, don't try to compare yourself with others because everybody's margins are different because they're all privately owned FBOs, and you'll never know what that number is. If you just take the raw cost of fuel, like the spot market for Jet A or Avgas, and you just do that differential, you can see, because their rates change almost daily based on what they're charging or what they're being charged for the raw product, that their profit margin, well, number one, they're recovering their operating expenses, but they also have a profit margin on top of that as well. So in the future negotiations, that would be a strategy to bring that back in-house, and you operate the fuel farm and you sell the fuel to all the other folks that operate at the field, whether it's self-service, full service, regardless.
I understand bulk run, changes all the time, but what is the current roughly bulk price for under low lead and jet fuel?
Gosh, in fact, I just looked that up the other day. Jet A is probably running around $2.89 a gallon.
Okay.
Avgas, the numbers aren't as much of a spot market as it is a monthly rate, but it's around $4 and change.
Okay.
So again, you can see where what that differential might be in terms of what the FBO's profit margin is embedded in that. I mean, and frankly, that's pretty much how they make their money.
Sure.
Does that answer the question?
Good.
So,
done? All good?
and again,
For now, yeah.
Okay.
and back to the original, we didn't feel like it would have been appropriate here in this discussion as far as the value of the lease, but certainly a topic for future discussion.
Commissioner Bays?
So I bring this up strictly from the fact that our sheriff is out there. And I would assume that he's fueling there. It would be nice to know how much fuel he's purchasing from there, and is he paying that 5 gallon per transaction, that 5 cents? So that we're paying essentially.
Right.
The other thing, back to, when you look at the comparative, fuel prices at other airports, A lot of them offer discounts. So what you're seeing is a retail fuel price, but a lot of the volume and the tenants will get a discount off of that retail rate. I do some fuel pricing for airport-owned FBOs, and that's always one of the strategies is to find out, who should we offer discounts to and at what rate. So volume customers and tenants are usually the two big categories that you would discount fuel for. What you-
Yeah, I pulled it yesterday evening. The lowest, it's still relatively the same, $4.11 for Marion County for Jet A, but that's self-serve. And so there's no really overhead attached to it for labor. And they're at $5.39 for 100 low lead. Whereas, Inverness is for self-serve, $6.49 for Jet A, $6.44 for self-serve, $7.77 for pumped for 100 low lead, and $7.49 for Jet A. I could send this to you. And then Crystal River, $6.30 and $6.50 Jet A, and 100 low lead respectively.
Commissioner Schleba?
Commissioner Bays asked a question that if, she was curious if the CCSO was paying the 5 cent, but according to your report, there was over 125,000 gallons sold just in Inverness, so that would include what the sheriff buys also, correct?
So the report that's provided is total number of gallons, not who bought the fuel.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's how much was sold. It didn't matter if it went to I forget the company, but or the sheriff or to visiting pilots. That's the total amount of fuel that was sold out of that.
Sold, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right. So we touched on the first one, the fuel flowage fee, what it currently is, and but the observation in total is your current lease is significantly undervalued. You had an appraisal done for both airports in 2016, toward the latter end, September, November timeframe. So you're quite a few years removed from that time. A lot of market changes have happened. Cost of real estate has dramatically increased. And so what was recommended in there, if you go back to the lease prior to, like at Inverness, it's $500 a month with a percentage of revenue. So it's a drastic increase from what that was. So activity is picked up, and although the appraisal did the same comparison of Brooksville, Ocala, neighboring airports, but said based on your activity, based on low number of based aircraft, there was no reported fuel usage except for 1 year. So it received the lowest level of valuation for fuel flowage at 5 cents a gallon, the lowest level of appraisal for what the recommendation for a building lease is, what a ground lease should be. And so, again, things have changed. Our recommendation is go back through that process of getting updated appraisals. Now that the business park is wrapping up, like 93% complete, it'd be good to know there was a market analysis that was done prior in developing the site layout and what the ideal cost per square footage you could charge. But that number likely went up as well. And so we showed the implied lease value for what you're getting currently. In essence, the county is subsidizing that lease. And it's similar to Crystal River, and we'll go into that. And so the base rent, it was at $3.75 per square foot. That's okay. The apron space is also leased. Where you see I think the widest margin is a subleasing of other hangars. The county does not retain any percentage of that revenue garnered. It all goes back. So if the FBO charges $1,000 for a hangar, the FBO keeps $1,000 of it, other than what they remit every month back to the county as the base of $6,657. So typically, there's a percentage. You could do it many different ways. You could do a percentage, a management fee. You could take those, have those fall under the authority of the county. But right now, they don't. We already talked about the fuel farm and the management fee. And so let's see, going to the next slide. So this is a revenue recap of county operations. So you currently have 16 T-hanger units. Again, most are 1,121 square feet. Average rent, $422 to $450. So annually, you're making a little less than $100,000 a year. There is a wait list of 20 for T-hangers and box hangers for 4, and that list has stayed consistent. And so through the verification of those that are on the list, the demand is similar at every airport throughout the state. And so in looking at your appraisal or your upcoming appraisal and what you value your land at, realize there's somebody at the lower end that says, I used to pay $100. I don't want anything more than that. And then there's somebody saying, like, I don't care. I've called every airport down the west coast of Florida. If you've got one, I'll pay whatever. And so that's what the market looks like. And so by doing the appraisal and doing the comparative analysis of airports around you, again, T-hangers, you're okay. And you made a question, Mr. Kennard, in the CIP meeting about return on investment and building hangars. Hangars, everything's more and more expensive. It used to be, half that value of $150,000, $200,000 to build just a unit, right? And so if you're charging $420 a month, let's say you divide that by, say if you spend, I think the budget is $1.8 million is what you have allocated for Crystal River. So you take $1.8 million, if you're going to build 10 of them, it's $180,000 divided by 420. It's going to take you about 20 years to pay that back or recoup that investment.
The 1.8, that's our 50%, or does that take into account the 50% from DOT?
That's our 50%.
Okay.
While we're on the subject of hangar lease cost, how does that trend line work over 20 years? Presumably the rates would go up significantly in 20 years.
Yeah, that was an item of discussion that we had with the advisory board, and whether you do a CPI adjusted or you do a flat rate. The issue of CPI is you're using markets that are not exactly similar to Citrus County. So your Ocala, Tampa market, there's some breakout metrics of the task that or at least the action item as it was amended, was to look at a curtailed CPI for this area. You can make one and assess that as long as there's consistency and those numbers are always going to be provided, whereas you could also do a flat rate. With the CPI, the recommendation was to have a ceiling not to exceed 3% and a floor not to go below 0. Negative market conditions, you're not going to give back concessions on your lease rate. But also, if, as you saw over the last 3 years, 21% increase, it hits a little bit. It's definitely more than 3% a year. And so if you limit yourself to that 3%, when economic conditions are booming, it's really an ideology of what you want to. Do you want to stay pace with it and charge 9% that year, or do you want to just allow your tenants and operators to plan for a 3% flat rate or 5% flat rate? And it could be adjusted. They call it, it's a living document, your lease. So as your minimum standards, rules and regulations update, it should be able to add those things in, as well as your, as well as your CPI. And so whether that's adjusted every 5 years in the renewal term, or if like an FBO, a T-hanger may be every year as an adjustment.
I was just going to say that resets every 5 years. So you do a reappraisal. So, the markets may change around you on what the going rate is for any of the hangar space or any of the space on your airport. So it would be built into the lease that on the 5th anniversary, after you've done your appraisal, that would set maybe the base rate, and then that adjustment would kick in for like a 5-year period. So that's kind of the strategy of how that would work. You talked about the 20-year, but again, the idea is, can you amortize out your investment? So you're just the sponsor's share of what you spent for the hangars. Can you recover that at a rate that's reasonable, and marketable? So having, finding that balance of what you're charging versus what you're recovering really needs to be part of your business plan.
In terms of a 20-year, getting our money back in rents, somewhere in there, are you accounting for the increase or the economic impact on the community by having more airplanes here? Because that's typically, those are obviously higher socioeconomic status. A lot of times they're business owners, et cetera.
Correct. I mean, for what you have now in terms of hangar space versus what the demand might be, so the 20 aircraft waiting list may grow to 40, during that 20-year period. And if you're not providing for it, it actually has an effect on the market value of the T hangars that you do have, because you're the only game in town, and so people are willing to pay more. And frankly, in probably the next 2 to 3 years, I think you're going to be shocked at what T hanger rents are going for the T hangars that are owned by private companies, and what they're charging versus what municipalities might charge for that same rent. But here the idea is you just don't want to get behind that curve.
Right.
Stay ahead of it, because eventually they'll have to be replaced. Whether it's 20 years or 30 years is probably more the norm for hangar-type facilities. So that might ease the pain a little bit in terms of what you have to recover, in terms of what I call capital recovery, which is essentially depreciation, is that eventually these facilities are going to have to be replaced, and whether or not you have the resources of FDOT or anybody else, that's kind of the unknown, that you might have to replace it 100% instead of
Right.
50.
And you're saying it's typically a 30-year replacement cycle?
I would use 30 years as a typical building depreciation schedule type of arrangement. So, but that would be part of that equation of what it's costing you, not just in maintenance and wear and tear, but also the fact that someday you're going to have to replace it.
Commissioner Bays?
So just to strike a difference, if I look up in our area, a storage unit that's a 20 by 10, it's $313 a month. Just to put the overflow of crap from your house in it.
I'm not going to say that again. I said that at the airport advisory meeting about storage units and got smacked down pretty hard. But you're right, or boat slips or anything else that you might compare it to. That obviously the cost of flying is expensive, just like everything else. But the value of a storage unit at an airport has that value to the owner who wants to keep it under a hangar as opposed to keeping it outside. So that has a way of affecting what that market rate would be. So again, when we did the comparables, the idea was see if we can match apples to apples what the going rate is. But it doesn't seem like they're building a lot of additional T hangars around the area, and the ones that they do are very expensive. So that $150,000 to $200,000 per unit is not out of line for what the rates are now, or for actually building the hangars as well. So how do you get that money back even if you're only paying 50%? So a 10-unit T hangar is going for $2 million. You're paying half its $1 million over 30 years, plus the maintenance into it.
So here's my question, because I don't really know anything about an airport or but I try to look at it from a business perspective. And are most airports ran like, would they calculate rents based on a triple net lease like you would in a commercial strip center type venue? Because, and the reason I pose this question is if a tenant or somebody comes in and they build a hangar, and the minute that it's built, it becomes the property of the county, and they turn over the control, becomes the ownership of the county. So now the county is responsible for the insurance coverage on that hangar. Whether it's a T hangar, a box hangar, a corporate hangar, and now you have that cost. So the tenant is only responsible, just like as if you were renting a house, they're only responsible for the coverage on the inside of whatever's interiorly in there that's theirs. And they're gonna do their liability. Now, I asked for these numbers on assets at both locations, and I was told that the Inverness Airport insurable assets are $5,847,400, and our insurance premium is $44,800. And it's $70,042 at Crystal River. So if you're leasing these out at pennies on the dollar, and I don't feel like we're actually even including our overhead costs. So the repaving of the taxiway or the parking lots or the mowing, the upkeep, the maintenance of everything, that's when I say a triple net lease, because that's all I really know. I just know like commercial strip centers or a mall or a venue like that, because that's all the responsibility of the county. And how do these numbers compare when you add all of that overhead in?
That's a good question. Going back to your original observation about, somebody has a ground lease and they build a hangar and they essentially give it back to you. Mm-hmm. That shouldn't be the approach. It should be that you will own that building at the end of the term of the ground lease. And it better be in the shape or some kind of reasonable shape after 30 years. But you have no responsibility for that structure. That should be pretty much whoever is in there who built the hangar in the first place. And your only responsibility is maybe for maintaining the infrastructure up to the point of his leasehold. He's responsible for the rest of it. And at the end of the term, he essentially reverts ownership back to you. So technically, you do own it, but you haven't taken possession of it until that term is over.
So then that leads me to the next point that I would make, because after looking at multiple things, leases, all of it, I would recommend to my fellow board members and to staff, we need an FAA attorney. We need somebody that specializes in FAA that can review all of these documents, give us some real direction, make sure that our leases are in order. So it seems like we're kind of putting the cart before the horse here. And I was listening to what you said about our lease with the fuel, exclusive rights that we can't give away per FAA. So I think we got some homework to do. I think there's a lot that we need to look at, and I'm very grateful that we're doing this now. And I'll have more later, so thank you.
Well, I hope I answered your question.
You did, thank you.
But and one point of clarification, fair market value for aeronautical use is what the market will bear, what they're willing to pay. So if consistently you look at airports, you would think, man, people should be paying thousands of dollars for these. Not everybody that owns a plane is wealthy, but it does take money to operate. And so, even though it's $420 a month, I have a camper and it's $150 a month to park that. It's not covered or anything, but, it's, comparative. You would think that it'd be more expensive, but it's based on what the market is willing to bear. And then when you go outside the AOA, the fence, you look at non-aeronautical, it's fair market value comparison of what that would go for in the private market. And so you see those prices per square foot being a lot higher, traditionally including the triple net. I think you can do that. There are airports that include all expenses that are allowable, right? Example being if an FAA pays for an apron or a runway, it's like there's the compensatory model versus residual. Whatever your costs are, you pass along to the operator. Anything paid for by FAA, you can't amortize those costs out. You could do the wear and tear, operations and maintenance, but and you'll see that in an enterprise fund. Here's your expenses. There's our revenue. How do you make it self-sustainable? How do you have a balanced budget? Well, your revenues need to go up. And so across the board, whether that's retaining the revenue from all of your hangar buildings to charging what the market will bear. So if you're charging $420, yes, you're at the higher end for key hangars, but everybody still has vacancies. So the market may be able to bear more. And same thing with price per square foot for a land lease. If you're at 17 cents a square foot, you have a current operator at Inverness paying about $50 a month, a little less. Well, it's about a little less than $500 a year for a land lease for a hangar. That's not a lot of revenue to count on. And so 17 cents a square foot is relatively low. There are other airports that charge similarly, but the market's definitely going up quickly. That's why we recommend an appraisal. And they won't just look at this region. They break it up into states from the Panhandle, the eastern part of the state, southwest part. Miami's got its own little area. And the area that is in the, I guess, northwest part of where we are, it's similar to the CFAS region. So you get really in-depth data there, but you get across the board in-depth look at all for land leases, terminals, apron space. And in lieu of, having the funding from FAA's not very supportive of revenue-producing facilities. They do have the bill funding infrastructure grants that are currently in the market. But they'll be expiring, going away next year. But they do allow revenue-producing facilities. In lieu of getting legislative funding, you could bring in a third-party developer, or they would build it. You get a percentage of revenue, and in concert with the rates and charges, though, of setting the similar like CPI, lower level, higher level of what the intent is. And the FAA limits really the competition of how much you could charge. You can't be discriminatory, right? You can't charge exorbitant prices. If everybody's selling fuel for $3, you can't sell it for $10, for $7. There needs to be comparable market for all users. So third-party developer, that's happening a lot, and that's what Dave talked about, is similar to the real estate market where you have these global companies coming in, buying up all these houses. They have the capital, they could do it, and for them, but they still have to amortize their investment. And so they're going to be charging likely higher than you. What's going to be a detractor for them coming in. If you have lower rates, they can't compete with it. So you will not be able to attract a third-party developer to have that consistent revenue. So it's got to be a balance and getting everything up to the right platform to be competitive, and that way you can make the decisions. And another talking point is the business park. The report that was done saying $8 a square foot, $10 a square foot. This is $13 million a year potential revenue. But if I'm an operator coming in and seeing these other leases at a lower rate, I'm going to say, well, I want that deal. I want a 50-year lease. I want all the things that have been approved before to benefit me. Why do I have to be the first person to get the new policy? So at some point that has to happen to be attractive. Let's see. Okay, additional revenues. The Sheriff's Department You've got non-aeronautical land, which is the cattle at Inverness. So total revenues that you're bringing in is 210,000 for that airport. And then again, we talked about the 12.9 million potential build out of the business park. And that's the full build out, phase 1 and phase 2.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Finnegan.
I would like to see, maybe we might not have it today, but in the future, Commissioner Bays brings up a great point with this information that she's kindly shared with us about insurance. But when you take $210,000 and you take off the $45,000 for insurance, and for me, I don't really see the money from the sheriff's office as revenue, because then we just have to fund that anyway. So when you, paying for Todd and paying for the upkeep, like she's saying, I would like to see what that number looks like at the end. I think when we sat here before September, we had some concerns about, before you got here, renewing that 5-year lease, and that was a whole lot of craziness when that happened and some pushback. But I think because we saw some of this, like the numbers aren't what we see. We're not really making $210,000 a year. County may draw that in, but we're spending it faster than we're taking it in. So maybe Mr. Howard, another meeting, or when we can get those together, really see that budget 210 minus and see what we're allocating those funds to.
Commissioner Bays.
This is a left hanger here. If you had to take a wild stabbing guess, do you have any idea, like, what the revenues would be of the two FBOs? What they're making compared to what we're making?
Wild guess. Short answer is no, and a disclaimer to that. With available information of one building that's being leased at Inverness, it's $3,886 just for a trailer, is what a sublease is paying. Wouldn't expect that. So, based on that data point, to extrapolate out what the other ones are being charged, information received, another one speculated that it was $800 a month for another hangar. It's double than what the county's charging. So total all-in cost or revenue, made the point that if you look at fuel in of itself, you do the math at $7 a gallon, that's almost $1 million. And other things that, the county's not privy to based on the allowances in the lease. You don't have a lot of supporting documentation, but flight training, Andy's been very successful at Inverness, as is James. And so what that cost, or what revenue you're making on that, it's $2 million or more. Because at Crystal River, you could deduct from it because of the percentage of revenue. Anything over $800,000, the county gets 5% of it. So based on the amount that you got last year, work the math, and it's 1.8 million. So, but there's more hangars. There's more. Currently there's uptick in activity at Inverness. So overall, yeah, if the county were to run it, then again, flight school plays a lot into it, I believe. But solely the hangars, yeah, your revenue would dramatically increase.
It's just we need better operating agreements.
For sure. Yeah, and we go through that really in depth in our report of the different functions of your lease. They're there in your current lease, but it's a lot of ambiguity. So it's what's your interpretation versus my interpretation. And problematic there is that usually a judge decides that. Who's right, who's wrong. And, but it was written, it functions like it needs to in a perfect scenario where there's nothing going wrong. But that's inherently why we have contracts, is when stuff goes wrong. And so,
Madam Chair?
Commissioner Kennard?
Yeah, before we get too far down this road, I just want to make a couple comments and I guess go to bat a little bit for our current FBOs. The previous FBO or former FBO at the Inverness Airport had told me in no uncertain terms, you can give this thing away. I've worked it as hard as I can. Nobody's going to be able to make a profit here. That has obviously changed under the current FBO operator. Crystal River FBO has always been run very, very well, very successfully. And thankfully, we had a fantastic change of ownership there, and it continues to elevate. So while I completely agree with Commissioner Bays and Commissioner Finnegan that we need to look at, these are revenues. This isn't net. We need to know, I think, what our net is, what the taxpayer, if our revenues are 210 and the taxpayers ultimately are putting 300 a year into it, our net's minus 90, right? Every single year. But we can't discount, and may be a little bit contrary to how I started this meeting, we can't discount the effect that 2 successful FBOs have on our local economy. There is a net benefit there to additional jobs, additional revenues created. Certainly passing the Crystal River Airport on a regular basis, the number and size of jets that I see over there is, quite frankly, it's impressive. And that has changed over the last, I would say probably the last 3 or 4 years. The hardware that's sitting out there on that apron really is quite impressive. Those are folks that, whether it's a net jet stopping in to take somebody out of here, and that may very well be likely, or it's somebody's personal aircraft that's coming in here and leaving with friends or family, business, college, whatever it is. Those are folks who are bringing an awful lot of value, net value to our local economy. Those are folks that are coming here and I believe leaving an awful lot of revenue here. So I won't broaden the discussion too much, but yes, we need to look at revenues. Yes, we need to look at net, but we can't discount the value that 2 successful FBOs are having to our local economies as well.
I can chime in on one other value too for disaster relief. It's really important to have 2 really thriving airports. And the running joke in my family is that my dad either paid $2 an hour for the privilege of running that airport for 40 years or he, made $2. Like, it was a labor of love, and they're not making a lot of bank. So, and I would do this for any business, even outside aviation, but we do need to protect our small businesses here in Citrus County. So there is a huge value to these airports. And I did have a question on your enterprise fund comment. You said that putting money into an enterprise fund is a gray area, but until we get some of the business park properties online and things like that, it's very likely to be a net loss. So is that almost like starting a business where you expect to have, a negative net for a little bit and then it comes online?
that's right.
Okay, so that's okay, because you scared me a little bit with the gray area comment.
The goal is to be self-sustainable, right? So the actions that you make sure that you're not going the opposite direction. And so, at the end of the day, I think, not sure exactly what your resolution ordinance says about, being, in the black. But I think the airport itself would still fall under the county government, and it wouldn't be held to its own standard of a balanced budget. Ultimately, you'd want that. But the opposite's also true. If you're showing tons of profit or retained earnings in there, what are you gonna do with it? Because, concerned citizens, your constituents are gonna say, well, wait a minute, you have all this money, you don't need taxes, you don't, so it's obviously the balance.
Sure. Thank you. Anything further before we let him continue? And carry on?
So our next recommendation, I said this at the beginning, rewrite and renegotiate. So the intent there, the goal of the study was to find terms that are for prosperity FBOs, for continuance of their operations, but also beneficial for the county, mutually beneficial. What we see is that that's not the case. So it doesn't have to be all the way on the other extreme where you take everything back over. That is absolutely an option, but at the end of the day, our recommendations don't do that until the end of, if you're gonna consider that, look towards the 2028 timeframe for the expiration of the lease. If you are gonna take over the FBO, there's quite a bit you would need to do. Staff, equipment, assets, fuel trucks. There's a lot that really kind of outside the bounds of our scope. We didn't look at hard enough to say, how much would it cost to run an FBO? It's a lot of work. I mean, to run the flight school part, anytime I go see those guys, they're always running around kind of wild. They got a lot going on. So to take that and bring it in-house to the county, our recommendation is to renegotiate and rewrite to make sure that you have terms that are prosperous for both.
Madam Chair,
Commissioner Kennard.
I'm gonna try as hard as I can over the next 3 months to make sure I'm here in 2028. And I would be a no on the county taking over the FBOs, either one of those. Yes, it needs to be mutually beneficial, but in the calculation of the benefit to the county, we need to look at the benefits again of the collateral effects of having a successful airport on each side of the county, which is unusual for a county our size.
100% agree.
Okay, some of the other recommendations, appraisal of premises, we talked about that. Let me go back. There you go. Fuel farm, and which the appraisal would include the FBO, the hangars, the fuel farm, all facilities in the airport. And then rents and fees, the established rates and charges policy. That would establish essentially your a la carte list of what services you provide and what you charge. It also identifies your going hangar rates, and it's published. Typically, entities vote on it and approve it. That we can't go below it, we can't go above it. These are our rates for the next 12 months. Established value for the FBO, you'd get that from the appraisal as a percent of appraised value. This one, the hangar is removed from new lease, assume management responsibility. That's a big one. Based on current fuel flowage, operations, and the other things of where speculate the FBOs are making their money, a big one may be the subleasing of those hangars. So if you take those out, I bet that's a big item for contention and negotiation. So.
On that note, I've always said that the hangar leases should be handled all by the county or all by the FBOs. That split thing is really poor customer service because pilots have to get on 2 different lists and there's not always great communication. So seems to me, looking at it from a customer standpoint, it should be one or the other. So.
That's right. Fuel farm, we talked about fuel flowage fee. We'll go ahead and go to Crystal River. Okay, so really different lease as compared to Inverness. It's lease that was signed in 2013, and it's a lower rate consistent without a CPI or flat rate increase per year, but also has a provision for 5% of revenue remitted back to the county in excess revenues of $800,000 per year. And so Crystal Aero Group submits the finances and looks at the monthly revenue and then does an annual report each year, and it's what it is. And that's the way the lease was written, and it does include one additional 5-year option. So May of 2027 would be the expiration of that lease. No.
That was, we call that the Cool formula, based on our old county administrator, Gary Cool. And my father always said during downturns, there's no way to survive on a higher lease rate. And so that was just a sort of a mutually beneficial arrangement between the FBO and the county.
Okay, so the facilities that are included, the terminal hangar building, the 2 shade hangars, corporate hangar, the fuel farm, and the entire apron that surrounds the terminal, shade hangars, and the box hangar. Similar services to Inverness, although James did announce at the AAB meeting that his maintenance facility is up and running, right? That he moved from Ocala, isn't that right?
Avionics, you mean?
Avionics, yeah,
Avionics shop. We already had maintenance there, over there.
Avionics,
So.
that's right. So this next slide, similar to INF, you break out of revenues, $3,200 a month or $38,400 a year with the 5% over $800,000. The very bottom, you made $54,340. The county did through last year. And the implied lease value is $161,950. It's about 33% the value, or 67% not remitted, based on implied lease value. So the revenues from the county, that's not right. Jet A, what do you include there? Okay. Fuel, that's what you could make, or what you do make, 'cause you don't make, I'm sorry. See the fuel flowage for.
Right, yeah, the one difference, with the 2 leases, he does report his fuel flowage, but he doesn't pay a fuel flowage fee. So that's essentially bundled into his percentage rate.
The 5% over 800.
Right. So, again, when the time comes for renegotiating, that may change, based on how you want to handle the fuel tanks and everything else. And to your point about, we're not trying to run them out of business, but frankly, you don't know what the airports are costing you. And you don't know what they're actually making. And so that's the 2 big mysteries that we have to resolve and find that balance. That you have to recover your costs. That's bottom line. You're not a charity, and you can't really let the general public subsidize the airport operation. So that's the struggle, is to find where that balance is, that they can make enough money to go forward, do what they need to do, plus grow. So they're in the business to make money as well. So, but they're using the county's facilities to do that. So that's where you're really got to find, what those numbers really are, what it's costing you, and do it in a business-like manner. That answers the question.
Yep. Thank you.
May I?
Commissioner Bays?
Can I ask one other additional question? I had all those notes down, so I'm glad you just said that, but generally speaking, if you have flight schools, what is the limit of liability that you would typically see on their policies for the FBO, or who's doing that at the?
Usually that should be in your insurance coverage schedule.
I know,
different
I'm
types of
asking what
operations.
is typical though in the industry?
I've seen $1 million for the flight training component of that as a separate rider on the insurance policy. So there's actually a separate coverage if you're providing flight training. That's really the FBO's insurance. You should be the additional insured in all those cases.
But $1 million, so you're taking people up that have no experience to fly around over residents, and all they have to have is $1 million to cover that?
Liability, yes. That's pretty much the standard right now. There have been some airports that have tried to increase that to $2 million. For what you're worth, in terms of a fatality, obviously that's not enough. But that seems to be what the minimum liability is for a policy like that.
Madam Chair. Just a question about that. You said $1 million on top of, so I guess if something fatal happened, it'd be the $1 million plus whatever the other insurance is. What's the other typical insurance? So you have a current amount and then the rider on top of that. So what would be the total value?
Yeah, so to be in the FBO business, there's a lot of different activities. So, just your liability, hangar keepers, you're responsible for handling aircraft and they get damaged. Or I'm thinking of the, fuels, completed products, those types of things where for every activity, there should be a separate coverage for each one of those, plus a general liability on top of that. And then there may be a requirement for an umbrella, so, really what you want out of this is to make sure that you have the same protections. Because obviously, if there's a lawsuit over a claim, if the FBO can't satisfy that, they're going to come after you for whatever that is. So you sort of have to be in that business of, and that's what the minimum standards are for, just to make sure they're operating appropriately. They have the right people, the right aircraft, the right equipment. That if things do go south, that you're protected, your liability is minimized. Obviously, they go after, the PO first, but that doesn't mean you're going to be involved in the claim.
To Commissioner Bay's point, it's been a long time since I've been a student. I have never paid insurance to be a student. Has that changed?
Some people require renter's insurance.
I pay renter's insurance, but I'm already certified, so,
Okay.
and I only pay, I pay a bulk renter's insurance just so I can go fly other airplanes by myself. And then what about, and I've never been a flight instructor, do flight instructors have their own separate policies?
They should. That's the scariest of all of those is.
I'm getting
send
a
student up.
shaking head behind you.
That's the one thing they never prepped me for was your first solo, the first student you solo, and
Yeah.
are you covered, if they make a mistake? Well, back then, no, we didn't have coverage, but you can get coverage for that type.
There is a reason I never became a CFI. I had a feeling someone would kill me.
That's usually the gambit is try to keep them, keep students from killing you. That's usually the prime directive.
Yeah.
But after that, if they can learn how to fly and you can teach them, that's the satisfaction of it.
Commissioner Bays, you had something else?
I don't know, I lost my train of thought.
I'm sorry, I derailed it.
Yep, you did.
Okay, so picking back up, and looking at the current lease, what you have, it does include the terminal hangar, but no adjustment. Again, it's a flat rate fee. And then ancillary facilities, as we talked about with the different buildings, and the fuel farm, revenue recuperation, similar to Inverness, where that doesn't come back to the county. As far as county-owned properties, 2 10-unit T hangars, 2 box hangars, 16 standard units, a little over 1,000 square feet, and 4 in units, and then the box hangar, 3,472 square feet. Total estimated revenue there is $130,000 that the county's making. And again, wait list for the T hangars is remaining steady. So you add the, let's see, well, skipping a slide here. So again, similar recommendations that we had to INF, Inverness, to Crystal River. Renegotiate, work with your FBOs, figure out what's equitable, and figure out what the county wants to take on as far as authority, management, and what's your level of shared responsibility. So side-by-side comparison, revenue is at close to $400,000 currently. If it's okay, for sake of time, recommendations, nothing's changed here. It's just a recap from what was already covered. We can move forward with that. And here's operating expenses. Again, I already prefaced that the available data of what we had available, that was given to us, there are gaps in that. The cost as provided, like administration, it doesn't take into account Todd's salary. It doesn't take into account, a share of all the people that contribute to managing the airports, from county administrator all the way down the line. And for airports, other than capital improvements, that's usually your biggest cost, is people. So. But in total, the number is absolutely higher. And then when you add more staff to it, director, operations, it's definitely not a break even if you're making $400,000 a year currently. So our recommendation, considering both of those parts, is to adjust your chart of counts, and that would be later explained in more detail with the action items, is to create the enterprise fund, and identifying direct and indirect cost. Also, when we requested the insurance information, we got total coverages and total, amounts of coverage, but not the cost. So we just learned that recently, that what the county is paying out of pocket for your premium. And so adding those to your overall cost as well. All right, shifting gears a little bit, in our evaluation, what we also acknowledged was that the standard operating documents we have here is rules and regulations, minimum standards, standard operating procedures, lease policy, rates and charges. Most airports have those documents. They may be outdated, but the goal is to keep them updated. And I'll walk through those. Rules and regulations is what you as a user of the airport can and cannot do, from throwing away trash to speeding on an apron to, causing a ruckus, to conducting business. And those are typically updated as county policy may change, or a new tenant comes aboard, or new operator, just to know if you come on and you're in violation, these things are not allowed, or these things are allowed. And a lot of times, if you have those in place and they're updated, your leases will reference that document. So instead of putting that language into a lease document, the lease could be short with references to attachments or exhibits. And then minimum standards for commercial aeronautical operators, that really governs, based on standard industry practice, commercial operators like an FBO or a specific service provider. What you may have seen traditionally in the past is an FBO provides everything, as was required in the RFQ, from flight school to maintenance to ramp servicing. You can see where airports, the FBO could sub that out to another operator, or you can put out two RFQs that, you'll have a fuel supplier, you sell the fuel and manage that part, you have another one doing aircraft maintenance if one operator can't serve it. So the minimum standards applies to all commercial operators that are charging for the services. And it's to set bounds of expectations and what's legal and not legal, and a clear understanding to remove that ambiguity. If you can or cannot do this, well, I took it to mean that way, but that's what your minimum standards would be referenced in your lease. And then standard operating procedures, that's more of a, guiding document for the county of how do you do your wait list for the hangars? How do you set your rates and charges? It's almost like an AR, it's authorizing, this is how we conduct our business. We recommend creating.
Sorry.
Her stomach just growled.
Tell me about it. I got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in my bag. My wife got it. We can break it up. But we're wrapping it up, I hope.
We have not yet used Bring It In for a Landing yet, but it's coming. Just because of the pun, sorry.
But I want to stress that these documents are very important. It gives a common working ground for you and the business operators on the airport. So there is no unfair discrimination and application from one lease or lessee to another. It's equal application. The same thing with rates and charges is I can't be compelled or pressured to give somebody a lower lease rate or the opposite. This is what we've agreed to as a body to hold ourselves to as a standard, and so we expect the same from our operators. And so that way, you really can compare apples to apples to other airports, because if they are operating with these requirements, inherently, you'll hear from people that it costs more money to operate there, or it's, things are usually more expensive, because it's more, it's part of government, and it's really required by the FAA that the documents in themselves are not required, but the things that go into it, upholding grant assurances, those would all be included, and how you are required to uphold it and how the operator is, and sublessees. So if you're, if FBO is leasing out a hangar, all the responsibilities that are required of that lessee, they should be delegated on down, and that would be clarified in minimum standards.
I'm all about this, and Inverness Airport already qualifies as a TSA regulated airport because it's got a 5,000-foot runway. Crystal River will be joining those ranks. Do we require registration of vehicles that are allowed to have ramp access?
Yes.
Okay. I may have busted that then, since I have the code. I'll be sure and register my truck.
And another item to stress is that if, as pertaining to the FBOs in particular, you've got 4 to 5 years to start negotiations and figure out what that path is. These are really important to establish. They're going to take time. It's, as I call it, changing of the guard sometimes, where, man, we used to be able to do this. I remember riding my bike out on the apron, and now you're telling me I can't do that? Yeah. So it's tough conversations sometimes, but it protects your interest and your risk, mitigates risk for both parties. And as it gets implemented and the bumps kind of worked out, people understand that that's the usual expectation, and things move on. So, but I would say establish that foundation of policies, procedures, not to be bureaucratic in of itself, solely as a risk mitigation principle, and making sure there is no ambiguity and we're all on the same page as we start to renegotiate financial terms of the lease. If you'd like, I could go through, I think we covered most of all the things that are in there, policies, procedures, rules, and regulations. I'm gonna flip through really quickly. Yep. One that we didn't cover is development guidelines. You'll see this as, what color the buildings will be, minimum square footage. You have your land development code that dictates the requirements, but this would be an addition as it relates to airport properties. So we recommend that to make sure that because everything reverts to you, you want to make sure that what you get is consistent with everything else. And, I drove past Inverness this morning, and you've got some, I'll call them peach colored hangars, at the front by the highway. They're not peach, they're like, what color are they? Anyways.
Beige?
But further into the facility, you have a blue, everything's blue, and it's great, it's consistent. And so it's like, for consistency, you could just paint the hangars. And then now you have this continuity where you almost embody a theme, as the county looks to do signage and landscaping. It's the front door steps to Citrus County as you jump off the airplane. So,
My father beat that drum a lot. Aviation blue, all the hangars, aviation blue.
whatever color there's some airports will lean into the theming of, if it's a coastal or if it's desert community, whatever the landscaping and the colors are, to make sure that's consistent. So I included, this is a graphic from, I believe, another similar airport, but it shows what the typical process looks like for establishing a lease. A potential tenant shows interest, They make their application, they pay a fee, you sign a lease agreement, that this is what the rate's going to be, and then you work out the premises details, and you could run through that. But let's say the county needs to implement a process as part of the policies and procedures that know, okay, you can't jump to the last item, we got to go through this process of, just as you would get a building permit. You guys just finished up the capital improvement project meeting. We could go through, I don't believe there's anything on here some of these are a few years out, but let's kind of run you through your current projects at Inverness. You have a lot going on with the business park.
I think so.
The ends, little triangle areas, you have a pretty severe obstruction problem that for trees. They need to be trimmed. The FAA wants the county to undertake a public outreach to get the feedback from the landowners of their, desire to let the county cut the trees. But you got a corporate hangar going in and, signage and landscaping. We just finished up the FBO parking, stormwater pollution prevention plan,
And for Crystal River, we were looking at, the 3 properties would be the Dairy Queen, the strip mall, and that little house? Okay.
well, no, not the strip mall. So you have
It's hard to see on
the
this.
Dairy Queen. What's north of the Dairy Queen?
The strip mall?
What is on the same side on the east side? Is that both Dairy Queen?
Yeah, it's just like, it's very small,
Okay.
only a few businesses there.
Okay. Well, I know the Dairy Queen was sold and bought by, looked it up a few months ago, but recent ownership change. But the other house that's that's very close to the entrance of the FBO, it's vacant. Let's see, go back to Inverness here. Inverness, you have a lot, and a lot of that will be nailed down with the master plan. And some of the current recent feedback is the area to the bottom of the screen, the spray fields that abut Highway 41. Opportunity there, whether it's the racetrack, the fairgrounds, the water treatment plant, direct access roadway, a lot of different alternatives and options that could be implemented there. And you have a lot of space for aeronautical development. What we did not show is, just incorporating this graphic, is in the current master plan, you do show things on the east side or west side of the runway, abutting the park and the neighborhood. There's wetlands in the northwest corner, though. And then you do have some property towards the southwest corner that could be developed. Crystal River, major thing right now is the environmental assessment for the runway extension. I know that the FAA received the Phase 1 document, so they're reviewing it, and then they'll get into really the meat of it for Phase 2, which is a one-year time frame. And so you're replacing the fuel tanks, doing some vault repairs, landscaping and signage, and then coming up, really the bulk of it is related to the runway extension and purchasing the properties on the northwest corner, and T-hangars, a third set of T-hangars that we talked about, and then potentially an FBO expansion upgrade. I know one of the comments we received from James was it gets tight in there. So when things are going well, it does get a little tight. And the building is aging. I know you had a roof repair or replacement, really. And so things start to age, and that
What year
preventative
was it
maintenance.
built?
Ma'am?
What year was it built?
I don't know.
Was there when we moved here in 78.
So pre-78.
Yeah.
It's aging. Your preventative maintenance schedule, it's shorter and shorter and shorter of when you have to do it again. But adding more space, but keeping the collective nostalgia of what that building looks like is, I think it's on the planning horizon. But expanding parking is a big one. And then Aegis, that comes up every month in the AAB meeting, of getting the approaches back. And you lost one, and now you're about to shut down the other end, and you're going to lose two. But motion by the AAB was to ensure that one end is up before you start the other end.
Yes.
And I talked to Todd about that. It does take roughly 18 months from start to finish, but with all the things that you need to do for the runway extension, from finalizing the EA, property acquisition, design, and award of contract, that could easily be 18 months. So things may work out well there. So we did request suggested improvements from the FBOs, and this list, it's not showing up, is what was provided by James and Andy. And so, improve signage. I know the EAA chapter is requesting signage. I know the county is progressing that. Just wanted to include this in our report to know we're there from their side as we sat down with them and asked, well, what was your, what do you see this FBO turning into? Little tidbit as I said, do you want to be, a signature in Atlantic? Do you want to be a national FBO? Or are you comfortable where you're at? And it was interesting to hear the different perspectives and what their plans would be for the airports.
Madam Chairman,
Yes.
the financial incentives for the business park, the suggestion, I assume, is from Andy. Is he saying financial incentives to the businesses that want to come, or financial incentives to the FBO?
We have that in our report, and it's broken out further in the SWOT analysis. It's financial incentives to the businesses, whether it's tax incentives, development incentives that you take off the initial barriers to entry of cost.
Thank you.
I think the board is getting a little restless because we have a 1 o'clock and we may be pushing a little bit,
Yep.
Amy.
So what we
Because
could
we need a
do-
30-minute break.
Yes, ma'am. What we could do is, essentially, we have our strategic takeaways, strategic business plan summary. I think we've covered a lot. There is a lot to know about airports. But what comes after this are goals. They're broken up into 5 categories, from management and operations to financial to staffing. And you will see those again on the agenda at 1 o'clock. The goals that are included in here have changed a little bit in terms of language, intent, direction. But I think the updated language does work in the spirit of our report. And so it's working with county staff. There are some that may have opposition to, whether it's altering the language of clarification for what you want to do. And so we could go through those goals, or we could go through them at 1.
I think we're ready for a break, but because I also still have to do open to the public, and I would like to have at least a couple of the people I know that want to speak, so we have that percolating in our brain before the 1. But is that okay? Thank you, sir. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
for your time.
Okay. I'm gonna ask Heiko Kallenbach to come up as first to open to the public as the chair of the Aviation Advisory Board. And anyone who would like to speak, you get 3 minutes unless you have a letter on file, then you get 5. Please let us know that you have that. And fill out a green card, and please direct all comments to the chair. Heiko, we're not gonna run our timer is gone, but I'm not gonna run a timer on you. You said you could keep it to about 5 minutes anyway, so.
Yeah.
As chair of the AAB, it's, we need to hear what they want to say. Go.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Heiko Kallenbach, Chairman of the Aviation Advisory Board. We were, just want to thank Dr. Byers and Mr. Elsey for the excellent job they did on this research project. They did quite a bit of work, and there was a lot of input from a lot of interested people, including the AAB. We were included on the SWOT analysis, asked to provide our input, and what you saw was a valid, I think, collation of the input that was given by all the interested parties. At the end of the day, the goal of any endeavor really is to be financially self-sufficient. Whether that is something that's achievable in the short term with our 2 airports or not, Whether it's achievable in the long term really depends on any number of factors. We took a tour down to the Brooksville Airport to see what they do. They are in fact financially self-sufficient. They are an enterprise zone. They cost nothing to the taxpayers, and quite frankly, quite a bit of that is thanks to the immense amount of non-aviation related businesses to whom they rent. They have, what, 2,500 acres, something like that, that they rent out. They have an enormous business park that's all around the airport, and railroad traffic that goes to all of those businesses and out of that community. And that is how they make their money. Whether we can do that with general aviation alone is a question that we all have. I would think we're really going to need to think long-term expansion. The business park in Inverness is a great start. The more we can bring in other businesses like that to supplant the activity that goes on at our airports, the better off we'll be. We certainly share your point of view that the airports bring any number of benefits to the county outside of simply money, paying for themselves. There's economic benefit all over the place that we can't really begin to enumerate. And as Commissioner Davis pointed out, the benefit of having 2 disaster relief, evacuation, bringing in people at each end of the county is very important. I'm not going to talk right now about the individual recommendations that Dr. Byers and Mr. Elsey made because they haven't laid them out yet. We agree with much of what they have come up with. There are a few pieces that we think may need to take some additional thought. In particular, the concept that while the FBOs certainly take in much more revenue than the county does, the question really is what is their cost and what is their profit margin and how much profit are they really making? And we question whether that is the case. Commissioner Davis, you said yourself, sometimes your dad made it $2 an hour. Sometimes it cost him $2 an hour to stay in business. And he certainly didn't starve to death, but at the same time, neither were he or your mom rich people. And I don't think anything has changed to that extent today. So we'll need to be, we would encourage you to be mindful of that as we talk about renegotiating leases. That's really all I have for now. I don't want to keep you folks. I know everybody's itching for a break. I'm hungry myself. So we'll see you at 1 o'clock.
Or shortly thereafter.
Or shortly thereafter.
I'm Mark Klingel. I'm a member of the Aviation Board. I do have 2 things. One, I'm also a CPA, and I believe that we need to have a finance and do cost accounting of the airports. Right now, when Dr. Byers went through it, they found the revenue, but they couldn't separate which went to which airport. Therefore, I feel we need to have somebody doing that. And then Commissioner Kennard's question about the economic development, I had the same question. I contacted the state who did that. They used 5 general aviation airports and set the economic development that worked it. Said they used a southeastern United States formula, which is about twice as what I've ever used in economic development. And so we went from like 18 to 52 million in one airport. And Orlando went from 60 million to 300 million. The 5 general aviation airports they used included Page Field in Fort Myers, which is not like ours, and also over by Hollywood. So it can give you an example that it's there. So yes, they agreed it was there, and basically what I said was a thumbs up how they wanted to play it. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Andy Chan with Right Rudder Aviation. First of all, thank you everyone for really taking the effort to clean up the airports and move forward. It's an important part of the community, an important part of our nation. We here in the United States enjoy the freedom of flight, which most other countries unfortunately do not. And that's one of the things that makes us really proud of being an American here today. There's an old joke in aviation is how do you make $1 million in aviation? And the answer is you start with $2 million. Before Wright Rudder Aviation came to Inverness, as Commissioner Kennard said, 4 different FBOs tried and failed at the Inverness Airport. Wright Rudder Aviation has now been successfully operating there 6 years. As they pointed out, about 4 years ago, there was a bump in traffic, and that corresponds with our arrival in school and up our flight school traffic. Unfortunately, there were several factual inaccuracies in the reports that I urge the commissioners to research with staff, and I'm happy to go and meet with every individual commissioner to clarify with data to point that out. One of the things is, for example, on the slide they said 17 aircraft were based at Inverness. However, there's 16 aircraft just in the county hangars, and that doesn't include the rest of the aircraft. There's approximately 60 different aircraft at the Inverness Airport, not 17. Let's see. One of the big differences between Marion County and Crystal River and Inverness is Marion County is not a branded fuel supplier, meaning they supply fuel at their own risk. They do not have a corporate brand flag that they fly. Crystal River flies Phillips 66 flag, and we have Shell fuel or Titan aviation fuels. So that makes a big difference in the purchase price of our fuel versus being unbranded and unsecured with a lower quality fuel that Marion County sells. With that said, currently at today's price, Inverness is approximately only 3% higher in fuel price than Crystal River is. So it's not as big of a swing as it sounded in the presentation. One other big difference that was not accounted for is when we took over the fuel farms, in our lease at Inverness, we are responsible for maintaining the fuel farms. To date, we've put over $300,000 in maintenance of the fuel farms, and we can document that if you're interested in seeing that. But it is not inexpensive to run fuel farms and comply with all of the audits that's necessary. In addition, we have over $750,000 in purchased fuel trucks that also require regular maintenance. As they did point out, most of our fuel, approximately 99% of our fuel, is sold under wholesale rates. Because we are a flagged operation, we have to guarantee specific discounts to certain carriers. We're very proud that since coming to Inverness, we've accumulated many, many different wholesale clients, including Citrus County Sheriff, which previously, can I have the 5 minutes of the letter?
You don't have a letter, I'm sorry. I'm going to do the same thing to James.
Okay.
So just wrap it up. You're going to get another opportunity this afternoon.
No, 100%. So there's a lot of inaccuracies that I'd like to go over with each and every one of you.
Yeah, if you
one
can
of
keep
the
it
big
for,
ones real
just
quick.
keep it for one, please.
One real quick. Only 50% of the hangars at Inverness under our lease are owned by the county. The others are owned by individual owners. So those revenue figures that are projected are completely inaccurate because the county doesn't own those hangars, and Wright Rudder doesn't collect revenue because they're privately owned. Thank you.
Thank you.
James Chen from Crystal Aero Group. Thank you, Commissioner. About 7 years ago, I came here to take the first lease, and I had a renewal following that. I remember Commissioner Kennard made the comments. I still remember how big a shoes I have to fill, and that is indeed, it's how big a shoe. I realize how much I have to fill and how hard it is to running a FBO business. I'm happy to see part of that report. This presentation. I'm skeptical about some of the suggestion, but I just want to remind you a couple of items I had previously presented in the Aviation Advisory Board meeting. First of all, the airport is a public of infrastructure of the Citrus County. It's not entirely a business per se for profit. That is one item. It's part of the infrastructure, just like a park, like a hospital, like a jail. So that need to be considered. Second item is many years ago, and many years, Captain Tom Davis was operating on that airport at no salary from the county. He was doing up to the most of the standard with everyday upkeeping for that facility. And I understand that the county is considered to have somebody to to take some function and administering all that. I'm happy to see that. But that we need to be really careful to have where the border line is, who is responsible to operating the FBO. For instance, if somebody come into land at 9 o'clock and they get a flat tire in the runway, the airport have to close. And who is responsible to issue the loading? I don't think it's the county responsible to issue the loading. And I moved into next to the airport, 2 minutes away from the airport for that reason. So I can be there on site at 9 o'clock in the evening. Another item is about the profit. There's no profit for this business. It doesn't mean it cannot be, but for what many years in the history of the accounting, we provide all the accounting to the consultant. It's an open book. And with all the revenue generating number, it does not consider how much the increased cost we have to bearing from the COVID we try to still recover from. So it is a really, really hard business. I wish all the commissioner to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chen.
I'm going to make it really brief because I know you guys have your next meeting, but something that didn't come up that I think is important to think about when, especially looking at the development of the airports, is the funding revenue that we're getting from Tallahassee. And a lot of that funding revenue, and the people that have been there lobbying for that, and I know that because I was there with Gene McGee and several commissioners, asking for these dollars that we're spending at Inverness and Crystal River as well, focused a lot on workforce trade jobs. And that means a physical job at the airport that somebody in Citrus County can drive to and actually go to work and collect a salary and then go home and spend it in our county. So that number that Kennard talked about in the beginning, it is very inflated from FDOT. And I'm more concerned with the development that's happening on the airports that will actually bring jobs here. So looking at these areas, and we've talked a lot about private aviation and those kind of things, and I, bring a little bit of a different perspective as far as commercial aviation goes, but to be able to get these aviation companies, these avionics companies, some of these other businesses here that we can train people that could go into trade jobs, but then also to focus on, how many of those jobs are going to come with every single hangar. So when you talk about approving, T hangars, box hangar, commercial hangars, all those kind of things, my next question that I would ask for you to ask is, okay, what job is that going to support? Is that going to give somebody something here that are our citizens that we care about, and that we want to try to put to work? So, and that's the story that we're singing in Tallahassee. And to go back and to continue to ask for money, if we don't have those numbers, the actual ones to back up what we've asked for, then that pipeline is going to be cut off as far as, revenue goes in that stream. So I just want to say that that's something that wasn't brought up today, but that should definitely be in the back of everybody's mind when we're talking about that development out there. So.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Croft, a Citrus County native, a president of the Citrus County Historical Society. May is designated as
Sir, this is, I'm sorry, have not started our 1 o'clock meeting yet. This is purely for aviation.
Oh.
Aviation workshop. Thank
Okay.
you. Hold your fire, sir. Is that it? All right. Seeing none, we're going to close open to the public. Commissioners, do you have anything else before I call a 30-minute break for lunch?
No, but we are going to be able to go over our notes at the 1 o'clock on the agenda item.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I assume that this is, although Commissioner Kennard has requested a 4:30 stick the landing, so we'll see if that actually happens.
Well, he doesn't always get his way, right?
Okay, for those in the audience that are taking note, we already have stomachs growling up here. You don't want hangry commissioners. We're going to take a 30-minute break, so we will reconvene at 1:25. Okay? And we are adjourned.